tell everyone a little bit about MZN International. We are a social enterprise working with a variety of non-governmental, non-profit organizations, trying to assist them to be better funded, to operate better, and deploy smarter strategies. And in doing so, we provide a series of services, which include in-person training. And one of the things we are very excited about, as it has come back as of 2024. My name is Hande. As Ellie mentioned, I'm a consultant with MZN with a focus on business development, proposal development, and fundraising related issues. I think we're still experiencing a problem with regards to the slides, so I will try to. Oh, yes, we are there. The main talking points of this webinar will be on the basics of NGO funding and why donor maps are important, what we need to know about the donor mapping process, and also using the donor map. Initially, we need to think about why we are going into the trouble of preparing donor maps, updating all these different resources. Well, at the end of the day, it all comes down to creating a stable income stream for our organization. And why does our organization need a stable income stream? As we all know, especially working in the nonprofit sector, a lot of non-governmental organizations are dependent on funding from different donors. And most of the time when your income is focused on restricted funding, then it creates financial difficulties in times of lack of available funding. And therefore, it is important to diversify the funding and revenue system streams of organizations, and thus have a funding strategy. In this way, we can help set a minimum reserve level for our organization and define our minimum management fee, which needs to be recovered, or we can identify our gross margins for our operations. We can set our own parameters when identifying our own income system, and with using such a system and assessing the opportunities in the light of our own system, we can create a surge capacity for difficult times. All NGOs go through financially difficult times if their dependency on finance is on quite a lot of restricted funding, or a couple of regular known suspects, like when they work almost always with the same donors. And when one of those donors change their priority areas or their themes they want to keep supporting, then that NGO has difficulty in funding its programs and projects. Therefore, in order to have a stable income stream, it is pretty essential to identify your relevant needs. And it all comes with investing time on our capacity. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. Research we have conducted based on a survey of 53 different NGO partners in 2023 revealed that NGOs who achieve a high income growth each year, they spend between 40 to 60 hours per month per country they operate, or per country they focus on. And they spend this time on donor mapping, identifying and assessing opportunities, and engaging with potential or existing donors. It's important to note that this time of 40 to 60 hours does not include bid writing or program design. This is specifically time required or time spent on identifying different funding opportunities, identifying the donors, assessing and seeing whether there's an alignment, and creating an engagement strategy with each of these donors. And why do they do that? Next slide, please. Why are these organizations going into the trouble of mapping a large number of donors? Because to start with, a good donor map aligns your vision and mission with opportunities and funding organizations. So it is a way of visualizing, supported with data, on what opportunities are available out there that align or do not align with the priorities, strategies, or goals of your organization. And in doing so, you are able to investigate further for detailed profiling and research. You can identify your parameters on assessing which donors are high, medium, or low priority, depending on the needs and expectations of your organization. You can prioritize the available opportunities, and you can decide on which donors or which calls for proposals require immediate attention, whereas which ones are a longer term investment. With all this information at your perusal, you can also prepare your organizational strategic plan with your short-term and long-term prospects and ideas, strategies on how best to achieve them. In a manner of saying, a good donor map is the difference between constantly trying to fund your NGO and strategic sustainable funding for your organization. You, as a systematic way working with donor maps and using these information to guide your funding stream, it makes it easier to manage and easier to follow. Next slide, please. Then let's look a little bit at the how of this. It's important to remember this is a very simple and logical process, and you can tailor your donor map depending on the type of information or the type of strategy your organization is interested in. And the first step in doing that is to build a template. Make sure that this template is a live document, make sure that it's accessible, and it becomes an interactive document. One of the most common mistakes is spending hours on end, actually days on end, on creating a donor map. And am I still online?
Yes, I believe it is Jules who's decided to jump off just now. So let me just quickly pick up the slides. Apologies.
That's okay. For a second, I thought that it was my connection, which was troubled again. Anyway, one of the common mistakes is after spending investing so much time in designing a donor map and identifying all these different donors, opportunities, alignments, and strategies is to save it in a folder and forget about it. That is a huge mistake and the misuse of your time and resources. This document needs to be a living piece of information, and it needs to be regularly updated because in the real world, nothing stays stable. The information about donors keep changing. Their priorities, their strategies, their requests for proposals or engagement techniques, they keep changing. And so should your donor map also keep being revised and updated. And of course, when you are building a template, you need to think about parameters. Donors have their range of criteria and eligibility standards. Your organization has its specific capabilities, strengths, and the mission to fulfill. And then you need to make sure that these aspects are accounted for within your donor map. In other words, you need to create a donor map which focuses on the donor criteria and expectation and your strengths and strategies, and make focus on the alignment. It does not make sense to waste time on ineligible projects which will not yield in winning programs for your organization. You build your template, you set your parameters, and then you start researching your donors. This is one of the key parts of the process because the devil is often in the detail. You need to make sure that you are spending your time on building proper research criteria and identifying the information in your prospect lists. Which brings us on the requirement for building a prospect table. This document is where you summarize and prioritize the opportunities identified by your research. So just to quickly recap, we have to remember that donor mapping is not just an exercise we do and forget about, but it is a living document, accessible and interactive, and it is a simple and logical process to improve our access to different donors and different funding. Let's move on to a few opinions about building a template and setting parameters. First of all, it is important to understand who and what you are mapping. Your funding strategy determines your organizational ambitions. Therefore, your donor map should be showing which donor is a good match to help you fulfill those ambitions. So not the other way around. You should not be chasing donors just for the funding they make available, but you should be looking for donor organizations, funders, which would assist you in reaching the goals and objectives of your organization. Simple is usually the best, so do not invest too much on creative designs or different templates, but stick to simple but accessible tools while building your template. A shared spreadsheet will do, as long as you make sure it is updated on a weekly or a regularly basis. Always remember your priorities and apply them consistently. A coherent approach to donors based on their funding envelope, their experience and capability requirements, as well as their requirements for certain local registrations is key. So in other words, keep everything coherent and consistent. And in number 4, we have the reminder on setting the donor map to align with your organization's mission. Funding for funding's sake does not make a strong NGO. Just when you are spending and investing your time and resources to follow funding opportunities which do not improve your organizational capacity or bring you towards your goals, that do not help your organization to grow. So what are some questions we need to consider when we are building a template for our donor map? First of all, we need to think about our organization's short-term, medium-term, and long-term funding target. So what kind of funding do we need for this year? What kind of funding do we need for the following years? What is our funding strategy for the next 5 years and following time? And how do we split this target? How much of this funding should be restricted? How much should it be unrestricted? The splitting the target depends very much on our organization's financial structure and needs. And we also need to think about what programs our organization implements require funding. So in other words, what are the specific themes or thematic areas we will be looking for funding? And I had the feeling that I was lost for a minute.
And we lost you for the last maybe 10 seconds. So if you could repeat point 3.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things we need to consider when building our template is what kind of thematic areas or what kind of programs our organization needs funding for. So we might be running different programs, or we might be focusing on a variety of thematic areas, but not all of them might be in need of funding. So we would focus on the areas that require funding in the short term and have a plan for medium-term and long-term funding in relation to existing or prospective projects and programs. It's always helpful to think outside the box. So in addition to our usual programs, usual projects and focus areas, it's helpful to think which areas would attract funding in the near future, and can we make them part of our organization program. Another key factor we need to consider when building our donor map template is to think about the no-go areas of our organization and our funding policies. So in other words, if a donor is strictly against funding overhead costs, but we have to get our overhead costs funded, then it would appear that that donor is not a good match, and might be a loss of time to include in our donor map. So in addition to the thematic areas and the budget envelope, an important part of eligibility or alignment lies in the no-go areas of funding policies. This takes us to the question of what type of donors we are looking for. Are we interested in institutional funding? Are we interested in multilaterals? Would we be open to being funded by private companies? Or is there a possibility for investment funding on the horizon for our organization? And of course, we need to add to our template which geographical areas we seek funding for. It is highly important that the donors we are looking at are also focusing on the same countries we would like to, or we are actually operating in. And once we have our template, we said we would need to run a donor research. There are a few main tools for donor research, and some of these are the platforms we are all very familiar with. And we conduct this research on your existing donor agencies, your current partners, and the organizations you work with. You also need to research what your competitors and peers are doing when it comes to raising funds. So, what are their sources of funds for their programs? And using the common portals and databases to explore the donor organizations specifically for NGOs. Some of the examples are DevEx, Funds for NGOs, Triple Funds, the UN's own partner portal, UN partner portal, and Relief Web, which is more for tenders. Our recommendation is not to stick to just one resource, but combination of different types of research to give you a good variety and access to information. So we created our template, we got our parameters right, and we conducted a search on different donors as well as our competitors to identify their sources of funding. And what do we do with all this information? In addition to the donor map, we support it with a prospect table. In some organizations, this is called a pipeline document, and which also needs to be revisited regularly and actively managed. And the priority of this document is active calls for proposals, as well as overall potential long-term value of potential opportunities. These prospects should be allocated to team members who would be responsible for running important relationships or important processes. The document, the prospect table, is as much about long-term strategic networking as it is about the immediate opportunity. In other words, in the prospect table, we identify both the existing, current opportunities which need our immediate attention, but also important information which aligns us in a strategic position towards different donors. When thinking about the donor map and the prospect table, we recommend using a stakeholder network mapping exercise because it is usually a good starting point to identify our prospects. And it helps to have a large group of participants when we are doing this exercise. This would include our all the colleagues at our organization, board members, if we have volunteers who work with our organization, interns, beneficiaries who have benefited from the programs we have implemented, because all these different perspectives can bring in different information which might be useful to identify prospects as well as contacts. So here in the next slide, we can see an example of a prospect sheet. How clear is that? Yeah, well, not too bad. So you can see there are a number of tabs in this document. It starts with grant applications, funders, contacts. It has partnerships on it. And, to make sure that we do not keep losing our usernames and passwords, this template has also added a tab with all the usernames and passwords to access the different platforms we use for searching information. Under the tab of funders, we realize that it identifies the donor, the type of donor as well, and the type of prospect. So does this donor require a letter of inquiry, or does it prefer a direct grant application? Is there a need for direct engagements beforehand? And if there are existing opportunities, whether there are any deadlines relevant to it. And on the example below, which is from the grant applications section, it focuses on the current proposals, concept notes the organization is actively working on. And it shows the name of the application, type of the project, the funding status. So if it's already been evaluated as being successful or not. Are we waiting for the evaluation, or are we still working on the application? In that case, application in progress. And it identifies the next steps, sets deadlines, or makes note of the available deadlines. And it identifies the people responsible for taking those next steps as well. As usual, you can create your templates depending on your organization's priorities and the key questions you want your map to answer. But some of the basic information is to focus on identifying the donor, including their contact information. If there are any deadlines about submitting some kind of concept note, letter of inquiry, or a proposal, what the current status of your relationship or contact with that donor is, identifying the next step, and making sure that the focus areas are aligning. So we, as MZN, working with our NGO partners, also create and design donor maps to focus on their intervention areas. And we work with a lot of NGOs who invest time and resources on mapping their existing and prospective donors. Some lessons learned from such donor mapping experience is that this requires a lot of our time, which is at least 3 to 4 hours a week, just to go through all the available information, the platforms, and reading, assessing, and analyzing the information. Simple and accessible makes it easier to use. And when it is a practical tool and it's easy to use, then it brings more benefit and it stays more active. No one wants to spend additional time trying to get used to a different template or a document that is not user friendly. It always helps to share the donor map with the larger team, because you can bring on additional ideas or additional prospects. But to keep the admin access at a few people who are actually working on the business development side of things. On your Explorer tab or Chrome tab, what kind of search instruments you use, make sure that you have a bookmark folder with access to your regular search sites, the platforms, databases, so it's easier for you to access them. For the most relevant donors or most relevant calls you see for your organization, you can create Google Alerts, so you receive reminders when something new comes up. And internalize a process, develop and internalize a process across the team to keep your map and prospect tables up to date and relevant. Old information is not going to be helpful when you want to engage with a donor. Investing in 1 or 2 subscriptions to the most relevant donor databases is helpful when you want to access more detailed information on specific opportunities. And we would very much like to hear your experience and your lessons learned from different donor mapping exercises. Thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Hande. Especially appreciated the sample prospect sheets. That was the first time I've seen that myself. Okay, so we can get to the questions. There are a few. So yeah, actually the chats that were put in were just asking for the slides to be shared. So there aren't any Q&As, which I guess means we can cut this short, which was a nice 35 minutes.
I think we just received a question from Joy asking whether we use any additional types of visuals, diagrams, or maps in addition to the table. Well, in one way of putting it, this is a very internal document. So as you know, annexes or additional tabs, of course, you can use diagrams. For example, you can visualize the financial value of different donors to your organization. You can visualize the potential impact they would have in your program. But to, as I said a couple of times during the webinar as well, to keep it simple makes it easier to work on and to keep alive. You don't want a very heavy and difficult to rotate document.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Hande. That is it. Yeah, thank you so much for everybody who tuned in. And as always, we will share all of the resources with you in an email after the webinar. And yes, thank you very much, Hande. Oh, wait, there's just one question came in. Can you please explain a little bit about the last sentence of the slide concerning the subscription?
Yes, sure. For example, there are different platforms which provide information about a range of donors or a range of available opportunities, such as DevEx, funds for NGOs, and where you can subscribe to do some research on funding opportunities. That was what we were talking about.
Great. We've had a few more questions pop in. So from Reith Ching, he's asking, how frequently should we do the donor mapping? Quarterly, annually?
Oh, okay. So once you do your donor mapping, let's say you decided to do it in March 2024, from that moment, it needs to be updated regularly. And this regularly is, well, depending on your internal resources as well, human resources, and the time you can spend on it, invest on it, can be on a weekly basis to a monthly basis, but not a quarterly or a yearly basis. This, as I said, this needs to be a living document which stays at the corner of your eye at all times and changes. It does not sit, and gather dust. It needs to keep changing, being updated, because just let's just say you identified USAID as one of your potential donors in your donor map, and USAID under so many different sectors and thematic areas provides different opportunities throughout the year. So if you do this quarterly or yearly, you would probably miss a lot of engagement opportunities with that donor. I hope that helps with the answer.
Absolutely. And then finally from Joseph, we have a question asking, how can local organizations get connections of donors?
How can local organizations reach out or engage with donor organizations? Okay, there are multiple ways of doing it. So the quite a lot of institutional donors also have branches or offices in different countries. So, reaching out to them for a meeting and opportunity to introduce your organization is one way. This can be through email, through through their online forms, through their different contact opportunities. Following the events and conferences they visit or they attend, and meeting them in such events is another option, or being part of different online working groups where you can have conversations with different donors is an option. So there are different ways, Joseph.
Lots of options. And then Claudia's asked, how is the experience for donor mapping for government organizations? And do you have any tips in order to deliver a proper proposal to donors?
Deliver a proper proposal to donors. Ellie, would you, do the honors of informing about our other webinars or trainings that focus on proposals?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a lovely question to finish on. So, MZN, we've recently relaunched due to demand in-person training courses, one of which focuses on writing winning proposals. So I think this would be where you would get your answer, Claudia. So we in this training course, you learn how to write, manage, negotiate winning proposals, and get in contact with donors and write, as you've put it, a proper proposal. So the next one, I believe it's actually the end of this month in London, if anybody finds themselves there from the 25th to the 28th of London. But if that's a bit short notice, we do provide these globally. So in May, we're doing one in Nairobi, in June, Berlin, and so on. So I'll make sure to add the link into the chat now, and you'll also receive it in the pre-emailer resources after this webinar that have all of the information about that particular training course. And then we do have two other separate ones. One is on grants and beyond, so focusing on diversifying your income and building reserves. And then the third subject is getting project budgeting and reporting right, so that focuses on the budgeting side of the proposals. But I do think, Claudia, for you, the right winning proposals one would be one to keep an eye on.
And also we have some upcoming webinars on similar topics, on tips on proposal writing as well. So we would love to see you attend those webinars as well, Claudia.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have our next one that is on the topic of writing proposals is on the 18th of April. It's focused on writing better proposals to secure better funding. So yeah, that's one to look out. And then in the meantime, we also have a separate one on the 28th of March that is our quarterly funding briefing and donor updates, where we look at the major donor agencies in Europe and giving you up-to-date information. Yeah, so I think those are all the bits. So with that, I just want to thank everybody again. Thank you, Hande, for taking this so graciously. I know we had some technical difficulties, but we always get there in the end. So thank you very much, and hope everybody has a lovely day.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for your time, and lovely to have you online here with us. Goodbye.
Goodbye.